Zombie Hunter was an action platformer developed by High Score, a Japanese gaming magazine company, and released exclusively in Japan for the Nintendo Famicom in 1987 and the MSX in 1988. Other Famicom games released in 1987 include Final Fantasy, Castlevania II Simon's Quest, Metal Gear, and Zelda II The Adventure of Link. Yeah, it was a pretty big year. Interestingly, Activision acquired the license for Zombie Hunter and was going to translate and release it in the US for the NES, but the project was cancelled. The US version had the working title of Zombie Master. Zombie Hunter is a deceptively simple game that starts off as impossibly challenging but becomes very easy once you know what you're doing. There isn't much story to speak of. Defeat the big bad evil guy and recover the Life Seeker. Since this game was not released outside of Japan, you'll need to use an emulator to play it, and there is a fan translation available this way. Our nameless hero begins his quest to recover the Life Seeker in a forest, with a sword in hand and little else. You do begin the game with a couple pieces of armor, but you need to equip them by pressing start to bring up the menu and then use the armor pieces. This removes them from your inventory and equips them. Weapons don't need to be equipped this way, the hero just uses whatever item is in the first slot in his inventory as his weapon. As you go from left to right, you will encounter monsters that are fairly easily dispatched. When defeated, they drop a treasure chest which contains some gold and occasionally an item. The loot you find can vary from healing items such as food and medicine, to more armor like chest pieces and boots, to new weapons. Unless you're very lucky, you'll quickly find that whatever food or potions you find won't be enough to keep you alive for very long. Item drops are rare, and often you'll get an unwanted item anyway. The few healing items you find will get used up, and then you'll encounter these 3 squids and they will eat you alive. That's when you encounter the game's first real upsetting point. You only have 1 life. There are no continues, no checkpoints, and no passwords. 1 death and it's back to the title screen. So on your second attempt, you should go back and forth between enemy spawn points and try to loot more healing items as well as gain a couple of levels. Leveling up increases the damage you do and decreases the damage you take from enemy attacks, which makes a huge difference in this game. Once you're level 3 or 4, you can try to take on those squids again, and you should find them much easier than the first time around. If you refight a few monster encounters every now and then, you should gain enough levels by the end of the first stage to kill most enemies in 1 hit. That is, if you can finish the stage. Zombie Hunter's second upsetting point is that you are required to find a key item in order to open the door at the end of the stage. These key items drop like any other, so if you're unlucky, you can spend several minutes looking for one. At this point the game should feel somewhat easy, and the first stage boss is easy too. It will take several hits, but its attacks are easy to dodge. Unfortunately, boss monsters grant no experience and they rarely drop loot at all. Once you've beaten the first boss, you'll move on to stage 2, and when you reach stages 2, 3, 4, and 5, you are given a choice of different paths to take. The paths lead to the same next stage, but the monsters that spawn in each path differ. When you enter these following stages, you'll find out what use the candle items have, if you happen to loot any in stage 1. Candles are required to see underground, which all the other stages other than stage 1 are underground. Candles do not need to be used in the menu, they are used automatically. If you run out of candles, you can still navigate and see where pits and ledges are, but monsters you encounter will be nameless and you won't be able to see how much health they have remaining. This isn't a huge problem if you can one-hit the monsters, but as you venture deeper, candles will be more useful. Eventually, however, you will run out of candles, run out of food, and run out of medicine, and you will die. It's at this point that the game will seem impossible. How are you supposed to get past these enemies if there's no way to heal yourself? You've probably forgotten all about the gold that you've collected because you've yet to meet any NPCs or any shops. That's because the shops are essentially hidden. Each stage has around 3 shops, 1 at the beginning of the stage and 2 throughout the rest of the stage. To reach the main shop for each level, all you have to do is find a platform high enough that it will allow you to jump to the top of the screen. That's it. I actually encountered the shop for the first time completely by accident. At the shop you will find 3 items for sale, and you can sell items to the shopkeeper for some gold. He usually has at least 1 healing item for sale. The shop at the beginning of each stage is invisible. To reach it, you have to jump around the leftmost side of the screen while holding up and A, and then press the B button at the peak of the jump. This shop will offer different items from the main stage shop. There are also entrances to shops in certain doorways in some stages. You can enter it by pressing up and B. As you loot and shop, you'll find your inventory filling up with all kinds of items, and each will have a number associated with it. This number means something different depending on the type of item. For usable items such as food and medicine, the number represents the amount of times that the item can be used. A food 3 can be used 3 times before it's gone. Unfortunately, you can't stack similar items. If you have 2 stacks of food 3, you can't combine them into one food 6, for example. For armor items, helmets, boots, gauntlets, rings, necklaces, and so on, the number represents the defensive power of the item. Rings, bracelets, and necklaces increase your magic defense, the rest increase your physical defense. The final category is of course the weapons, but it's a little complicated. There are 2 basic weapons, the sword and the magic book. The sword deals physical damage and the magic book deals magic damage. The number shows you how powerful the weapon is. These basic weapons are weak, but they never run out, unlike the rest of the weapons, which I call special weapons. These include throwing daggers and shuriken, projectile spitting magic staffs and maces, fireballs, and bombs. The number on these weapons not only determines their attack strength, but also their durability. Let's take the steel sword for example. When I first found the steel sword, I assumed it was an upgrade over the regular sword, so I threw the regular one away. The steel sword is many times more powerful than the regular sword, but I didn't know it would degrade rapidly. The steel sword degrades at 8 swings per level, meaning that if you find a steel sword 3, after you attack using it 8 times, it will turn into a steel sword 2. After 8 more swings, it will become a steel sword 1, and after 8 more, it will break and disappear. This left me without any physical attack weapon and made it near impossible for me to beat the stage, since the enemies I encountered were only weak to physical attacks. Because of this durability business, I simply ignored the special weapons throughout most of the game. The basic sword is actually the weakest weapon in the game, but if you grind enough experience to get to the maximum level of 31, it will kill most enemies in 1 or 2 hits. Another reason I ignored the special weapons is because they can be difficult to use. The shuriken, for example, is strong and durable, and you'd think it would be great because it throws a projectile. But the hit detection in Zombie Hunter is quite poor. With melee weapons like the swords or the magic book, you can hit enemies that are next to you or underneath you. Your only true blind spot is trying to attack enemies that are flying above you. When using a projectile weapon, the enemy hitboxes seem much smaller, and your attacks will usually miss even when they touch an enemy. This means that fights will be longer, and since most enemies shoot fireballs at you, you take more damage. The only time I bothered with special weapons was at the end of the game, when you can get some level 8 items. When you find a weapon or candle item that has the number 8, this means that it has unlimited durability, and a level 8 candle will never burn out. When I first played Zombie Hunter, I was intrigued by its random loot. It reminded me of roguelikes, a genre that I find interesting but a bit too frustrating to enjoy regularly. Zombie Hunter seemed to be like a 2D platformer roguelike, where your success was as much a matter of luck as it was skill. As I learned more about how the game worked, I went further underground and I was having fun, but as I said before, I lost my sword and I desperately needed one. So I found a group of enemies that were relatively safe to kill, and I did it over and over and over again, hoping they would drop some sort of sword. They finally dropped a nice shield, which was great, but I still needed a sword. So I kept killing them, and they dropped another shield, and then another shield, and then another. I had noticed this situation before. It was as if the random number generator was getting stuck if I kept killing the same monsters again and again. This wasn't unheard of in games this old, but I was wrong. Perhaps the most disappointing thing about Zombie Hunter to me is that it's not random at all. Every single encounter has a specified item, and the only chance involved is whether it's dropped or not. For example, the very first enemy encounter in the game is a single Gargo. If it drops an item, it will always be a food 2. The only loot that is randomized is the chest that bosses drop, and 4 out of 5 times it's empty anyway. Because of this, it's foolish to play this game without knowing which encounters drop which item, because only 2 encounters per stage will even drop the key needed to finish the stage. I was able to get to stage 3 without knowing this, so it is certainly possible, but I wouldn't recommend trying. On the upside, this means you can plan your route through the game, and decide when to try to acquire equipment upgrades or where to grind for big stacks of medicine. This is certainly cheating, but I find it almost necessary because of the key problem. Speaking of cheating, you may notice during this stretch of the game then my experience seems to be locked at around 10,000. The reason is I used a cheat code in order to avoid an annoying bug. The max level in the game is 31 at 12,000 experience, but when you reach 31, the game tells you that your next level up happens at 13,000 XP. Once you go over 13,000, the game will show you a level up screen after every single battle. If you do some serious grinding, you can get to level 31 long before the final stage, and it seriously slows the end game. The remedy is very simple using the cheat menu in FCE UX. Simply add the memory addresses to experience points in the cheat menu and set the values to something until your experience becomes less than 13,000. In my case, adding 00D2 with the value of 00 set my XP to around 10,000, allowing me to finish the game without its version of the Simon's Quest text box of doom. As I said at the very beginning, Zombie Hunter is deceptively simple. There is no better word to describe this game than the word simple. There is no story, there are no NPCs to meet or talk to, the combat is very basic, each level is essentially the same, and the game can be beaten in around 2 hours. If someone were to do a tool-assisted speedrun of this game, I bet it could be beaten in less than 20 minutes, because most of the time spent in the game is grinding for item drops. That's not to say it's a bad game, but I honestly thought it was a very old Japanese computer game that had been ported to the Famicom, like Hydlide or Ys. It feels like a student project turned into a commercial game. To my surprise, after I beat the game, I discovered that there was a second quest. If you press select while at the title screen, you can play through Quest B, which changes the game in several ways. Firstly, you're much weaker at the start, and you gain fewer stats when leveling. In fact, the first 5 times I attempted Quest B, I died before I could even gain a single level. That is because the enemies at the beginning of the game deal magic damage, so the shield and helmet you start the game with are useless. I sold them at the shop and bought food with that money, and I was fortunate enough to get a magic defense item quickly afterward, making things much easier. The second and most interesting change in Quest B is that item drops are now randomized. I don't know if any encounter can drop any item, or if there are restrictions, but now you won't know which item you'll get when picking up loot. You can also get items much earlier than the first quest. Unfortunately, there are 2 big problems with Quest B. Firstly, because item drops are randomized, it can be absurdly difficult to get the key needed to complete a stage. I had no problem with the first 3 stages. I even got the key 3 item while on stage 2, so I could carry it over. I also had no real trouble getting the key in stage 5, and the stage 6 key is guaranteed. But the key for stage 4... I spent probably half an hour trying to get that thing, and it simply wouldn't drop. I would sometimes get a key 1 or a key 3, but not the one I needed. You need a key that is equal to or higher in number than the stage you're on, so if you're on stage 4, you need a key 4 or higher. The second problem with Quest B is a horrible bug that was probably in the first quest, but I never noticed it because it was so easy. Your character has defense and magic defense stats that go up every few levels. You increase these stats by equipping armor. Unfortunately, when you gain a level, your defense stats are reset to their base values. In other words, the armor you're wearing provides no benefits at all. For example, here I'm at level 28, and my base defense stats are at 11 each. This is a very low number at this point of the game, so enemy attacks deal a lot of damage. With all of my armor, it's in the 40s and 30s, and enemy attacks only deal 1 damage. But as soon as I gain a level, my defense drops back down to 11. The only way to restore the armor bonuses is to use another piece of armor to reset their armor values. The game knows not to replace a strong piece of armor with a weaker one, so it will simply drop the weaker one and re-equip the one you already have and restore the defense bonuses. But since you lose armor pieces you try to equip, this means that you have to keep finding or buying armor pieces in order to restore your armor bonuses every time you level up. This breaks the game. Since you only have 1 life, it's very easy to die accidentally or become overwhelmed by a new monster group. And since you keep gaining fake levels after you've reached level 31, your armor rating constantly drops. While the random loot makes the game more interesting, Quest B is much more difficult than the first quest, and by the end monsters take several hits to kill because I can't find a stronger weapon. All in all, I can't really recommend Zombie Hunter. Even if the bugs were fixed and the problems were addressed, it would still be a basic, straightforward action platformer with about 2 hours of gameplay. There are simply too many better games to be playing instead.